After the release of the insanely popular Tekken 3, the Tekken series went on a mostly downward spiral in popularity, until 2012's Tekken Tag Tournament 2 decided to downward spiral so hard that it almost killed the entire franchise. Bandai Namco only agreed to fund a new Tekken at all if it could be made on a significantly reduced budget, which resulted in Tekken 7, a great game that you could definitely tell had some budget issues. However, through a combination of solid gameplay and good luck, Tekken 7 went on to become the best-selling entry in the entire franchise, surpassing Tekken 3. And this gave the Tekken developers the opportunity to tackle the next entry in the series with a much bigger budget and finally realise the full vision for Tekken 7 where they couldn't before. And boy, do you really feel that in Tekken 8. The graphics and overall presentation have had an upgrade bigger than any game in the series, yet it still employs the same art style as Tekken 7, has similar character design tropes to Tekken 7. Hell, even a lot of the music sounds similar to Tekken 7. You'd think this means that Tekken 7 with a budget is all you need to describe this game then. Video over, thanks to my patrons on Patreon, but no. As much as this game on the surface just tries to do what Tekken 7 did with actual money behind it, it also takes a big effort to fix some of Tekken 7's glaring weaknesses, as well as issues the Tekken series as a whole has had pretty much since its inception. Tekken has had a reputation for its approachability not being very good for many years. Most fighting games, like for example Street Fighter, only have about 30 moves per character on average, or even a game like Smash has only 16 moves per character, and even that can be considered overwhelming. But when you look at Tekken, where the easiest characters still have over 100 moves with 50 stances and a million grabs that you have to know how to throw break, then you can see why Tekken is considered one of the hardest fighting games to get into. So, for a new entry in Tekken, it's imperative for the developers to really figure out how to make Tekken more approachable from a newcomer's standpoint. And Tekken 8 does a pretty good job at bringing in new players. Almost immediately upon loading into the game, you are greeted with this option called Arcade Quest, which is a single player campaign where you can make your own custom character, but instead of walking around a city like in Street Fighter 6, you're playing through different arcades, playing against different opponents who have completely different playstyles. Some of them are really bad and some of them are pretty good. And the whole point of it is it's basically a several hour long tutorial where instead of condensing every single piece of information about the game into a 20-minute long tutorial and you're going to forget all of it later, Tekken 8 decides to just spread all of that out over the course of 4 hours so that it actually digests. You start with the big explosive options that are really easy, and then you get onto things that are more complicated like whiff punishing and doing combos. And it will teach you this with any character you want. It's a really great way of getting into the game if you've never played a Tekken game before. So I'd highly recommend starting with that if you're one of those players. But for someone like me, who hasn't played much Tekken but is more familiar with other fighting games, you may be left feeling a little bit stuck because the AI has some issues. The reason why the AI works like this in this game is because there's actually two types of AI. There's the traditional kind of AI where it reads your inputs and you can't really fight them without just using the safest moves you possibly can or just gimmicking them. And there's the new Ghost AI, which is AI that's been trained off of actual people. Because of that, they play a lot more like actual people than AI usually does, which is great at giving you a better general sense of how people actually play Tekken. What's cooler about this is that once you complete Arcade Quest, you unlock this mode called Super Ghost Battle, where you're able to fight a series of AI ghost opponents that are based on many different kinds of players, from newcomers to previous Tekken veteran pro players, to even the creator of Tekken himself. You're even able to train your own AI ghost on yourself and download the ghosts of any player you want. So if you want to know what it's like to fight the best player in the world, you can, sort of. It's not exactly the same. Overall, the AI ghost system is pretty cool, and it's indicative of this general philosophy that the developers have had with this game, of trying to teach new players how to play it in as many ways as possible. The enhanced replays in this game are absolutely incredible. Not only are you able to watch back all of your matches without even having to record them, just like in the previous Tekken games, but you're able to fast forward, you're able to see different frame informations for each move and how plus or minus on block they are. The game will give you tips on what things are duckable and what things are punishable on block and stuff like that, and you even have the ability to take control of either character and practice the counterplay to each move in the game. So if you've gone online or fought one of your friends that has absolutely destroyed you with a certain move or on a certain character you've never fought before, you can just play back the replay and go in there for a couple of minutes to figure out how to fight it. This system is especially great for a game like Tekken, which, like I said, has hundreds of moves. And of course, there's the training mode, which has all of the features that you'd expect in a fighting game training mode, although that does mean that it's kind of standard. It may not compare to something as great as Street Fighter 6's training mode, but it does have a fair few new things in it as well, such as the punishment training, which is similar to some of the things you see in the replay function, but allows you to select a specific move for the character to do. And you can even have it cycle between the different moves so you can practice reacting to whatever move you blocked and choosing the correct punish. Again, I would say that the training mode in this game isn't as good as Street Fighter 6's training mode, because Street Fighter 6's training mode has the frame meter, which is a revolutionary piece of technology. But overall, it's very good at teaching you the game. With all of these things combined, it means that Tekken 8 is by far the easiest Tekken game to get into as a newcomer. So, if you were looking to get into Tekken, this is the game for you. And at least this time, you don't have to pay for the frame data. Okay, but let's say you don't actually care about getting into Tekken on some deeper level and you just want a fun game to play. Does Tekken 8 have that? Well, yeah, kind of. The first thing you'd probably be looking for a more casual experience is the story mode, which lasts about 4 hours and is probably the... Look, I'm not going to act like Tekken has the greatest storyline of all time, and nor would I expect it to have the greatest storyline of all time. But I came out of Tekken 8 story mode kind of feeling like nothing had really happened. Like it was just a bunch of things that some writers said had to happen and there wasn't really any reason for anything happening. I won't spoil anything specifically from the story mode because the game is just so new, but go in expecting something that's kind of like a shonen anime but is kind of generic and not that good, but it's charming because it's not that good. But if you also don't really care about the story mode, there is still a reason to play it, and that is because it's the only way to unlock Reina and Jun's character episodes. The character episodes are your traditional arcade mode in this game, with arcade mode just being fighting a series of AI controlled opponents one after the other, and then you just sort of end it. But the character episodes are that, but with a final boss at the end, and they actually end with an ending cutscene, just like the older Tekken games. They're mostly non-canon, but they're just kind of fun. So if you're into those are in the game as well, which I don't think they were in Tekken 7, or at least they weren't CG animated like they are in this game. Next is the game's roster, which is something that every fighting game needs to make it actually appealing. The roster is mostly made up of fan favourites and some characters that haven't been in Tekken for quite a while, like Raven. But we also have 3 new characters. Azucena, a coffee-loving dancer from Peru, Victor, a John Wick spy-esque character from France, and Reina, the Heihachi replacement. But nobody cares because she's cool, including me. A lot of the characters' moves in this game have been really pumped up and kind of, the only way I can really say it is anime-fied.
Tekken 8 has a huge roster, it's very vast, 32 unique fighters that all have their own look, personality, story, fighting style. They all represent different martial arts and they play in very different ways. Among the Tekken 8 newcomers we find Victor Chevalier, refined violence, a man who will bring any tool to get the job done, including a sword, a gun and a knife, and he even teleports.
So here's this giant
Victor Chevalier.
And some people really don't like that, because they remember when Tekken was all about just the fighting and they were all very grounded and everything like that. And then there are other people who'll be like, well, what about Kuma or Yoshimitsu? They've been stupid all the time and they've been in Tekken 1. And those guys are correct, but I do also think there's a case for the people complaining. Tekken has always had really silly characters, but the way that they were shown in the game was somewhat grounded. For example, Yoshimitsu would do moves where he would stand on his sword or he would like teleport around, but for the most part he was just punching or kicking you. And his really silly moves were things that he kind of did almost as like a last resort and more of a reserve reserved way. Kuma was a bear character who had funny poses and funny personality, but he also just sort of hit you and sometimes did silly things in matches. So for the most part, Tekken was about just simple MMA fighting and hand-to-hand combat. Then you compare some of the stuff we'd see in like Tekken 3 to the stuff we see in Tekken 8, and you can kind of feel the difference. And if you really don't see it, just compare the intros from previous Tekken games. Tekken 3, classy, industrial, reserved. Tekken 4, dramatic, dark, also kind of industrial. Tekken 5, yeah, we're kind of getting in the anime zone a little bit here. And then you get to Tekken 8 and it's all like... So remember... Tekken. I'm not saying the grounded approach is better than the more anime approach or vice versa. I'm just saying there definitely has been a change in direction in the tone of Tekken over the years. But if you haven't been playing since Tekken 3 or one of the older Tekkens, expect your favourite character to be doing some stuff that's a bit more wacky than the previous Tekken games. And also, if you want some more wacky fun, Tekken Ball is back. Online is probably a major sticking point for a lot of these games because Tekken 7's online was serviceable, but it wasn't the best out of all of the onlines you could have. And especially now when you're comparing to a game like Street Fighter 6, which has amazing netcode, the best netcode of probably any fighting game ever made, and it looks like Tekken has a lot to accomplish here. What's weird though is that a lot of the modes in Tekken 8 are very, very similar to the online modes in Street Fighter 6. You have your standard casual queue, ranked queue, then you also have this online arcade where you can have your custom character run around the arcade and fight people in the arcade, just like Street Fighter 6. So for this section alone, it's probably apt to compare Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8 directly since they both share very similar feature sets. The actual netcode itself for Tekken isn't as good as Street Fighter 6, but that does not mean it's not good. It does everything it needs to do. You connect to a match, it's responsive, there's barely any lag, and apart from the occasional freeze or like loading into a match it gets laggy for some reason, although I think that might be a PC only issue, it works pretty fine. You're not going to be able to fight people over such long distances like in Street Fighter 6, but for people more local you are able to play them and have it feel like offline. So netcode itself gets a thumbs up. Usually ranked modes in games have like some sort of very standard tiering system. They'll have like iron, then bronze, then silver, then gold, up to platinum, diamond, whatever. Street Fighter 6 has this, or every FPS has this pretty much, but Tekken is unique because for some reason they decide to have their own arbitrary tiering system where you have like cavalry and warrior and assailant and dominator and vanquisher and all of these like weird things, and the highest one is God of Destruction, which is it's kind of cringe to be honest. I'm not gonna be, I don't want to like go on the train and then like someone goes, oh, you play Tekken, how high ranked you? Goes, I'm God of Destruction. It just doesn't sound cool, and it also doesn't make any sense. You become a mighty ruler and that's lower than like Fujin. But anyway, there are still quite a lot of ranking tiers, which means that players are going to be evenly distributed across tiers. So you probably feel like you have a nice steady progression between tiers, but right now, because the game has only been out for a couple of weeks, it means that all of the best players are still climbing up because it takes a huge amount of time to climb up in this game for some reason. Even if you're winning every single match you play, it's like it still takes forever to go up the next tier, which might be an issue they could fix later on. But what is an issue they could fix as well is people cheating their way to God of Destruction and the higher ranks by using a VPN. I don't know exactly how it works, but people have cheated their way to the top without actually having to play against people normally. And they are looking into that, but the fact that you can do that does kind of sour the ranking system a little bit. It'll probably end up better as the game gets older and as people are more evenly distributed across the ranks instead of everyone being in like red ranks, so like red rank is now bloodbath at the minute. But overall, although it's still arbitrary, it's much less complicated than Tekken 7's. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really try the online arcade until like a week into my playtime of this game, and honestly a little bit of it confused me because there's one half of the arcade where you go to the arcade cabinets and it's just a physical manifestation of quick match and ranked match. There's no like second side like in Street Fighter 6. It's not just about fighting people in the arcade. There's like a separate section for that on the other side of the arcade. But then there's also this other section where you just go on ranked, and that's all it is. And it's kind of odd. I don't know why that's there, especially when you can just go on ranked when you're in the online arcade. You can just go into the menu and then you can pick ranked or pick quick match, and you'll be just standing wherever and you'll be queuing for it. You're also able to access online Tekken Ball here. You're also able to go into the clothing shop to change your avatar's look. And also, this is something I forgot to mention in the approachability section with Arcade Quest, but you are able to have multiple avatars, which is kind of cool. But overall, the online arcade is pretty much on par with Street Fighter 6's, although you can't play old Namco games like you can in Capcom's one. We can play old Capcom games, which is kind of disappointing, but whatever, that's just a bit of a nitpick. If you're taking all three of these things I've talked about into consideration, I'd say that Tekken 8's online mode is about on par with Street Fighter 6's in some areas, and not quite on par with Street Fighter 6 in some areas, but almost there, which, to be honest, for how the developers were talking about online before the game came out, is actually kind of a surprise to me, because I'm sure that some of you remember what Harada said, Tekken is 3, but it doesn't seem to be 3 in Tekken 8. The gameplay in Tekken 8 has probably been one of the biggest departures for the entire Tekken series, because Tekken is known for basically being very similar between each game gameplay wise. There's only small changes between characters and general game mechanics between each game. The biggest change ever in the series was probably between Tekken 2 and Tekken 3 and Tekken 3 and Tekken 4. But then as soon as Tekken 4 came out and people didn't really like the way that game played and there were a lot of issues with it, they reverted to more of a Tekken 3-esque style in Tekken 5, and then ever since then have just been refining Tekken 5 style, and that game came out in 2004. So it has been about 20 years of the same stuff for Tekken, with some small improvements and additions here and there. This also means that for competitive players, characters remain mostly the same between each game, with slight changes between them. So Tekken is a game a lot in competitive play about legacy skill, where someone who's been playing for 10 years is going to have such a massive advantage over someone who's just started playing, and not just from the perspective of they've been playing for longer, it's more from a knowledge perspective. There's just so much knowledge that's been accumulated in Tekken over the years that it's super advantageous to have been playing for so long, even compared to other games, because you can say that kind of about any game, but Tekken especially really factors that into the equation. So that's a consideration for the team. And then another consideration for the team is how Tekken 7's gameplay specifically was received, especially by the end of its life. Movement was relatively weak in Tekken 7, and safe counter-hit launches were prevalent and strong to the point of heavily discouraging offense, because attacking too much then risked you getting counter-hit launched with little risk for the opponent because the counter-hit launchers were safe. Also, if you did get counter-hit launched, combo length and damage was very long, which further increased the risk in offense because of high damage and long combos tending to end you at the wall, leaving you not only having taken a huge amount of damage, but at the wall in a difficult situation because you guessed wrong once. Now overall this made the game very heavily aggressive and volatile at low to high level, but at top level the game became extremely defensive because movement was just strong enough that you could avoid people's attacks by just running away, and because the top level players know every single situation and every single move off by heart, they know the risk reward of everything, and they know the risk reward of everything in Tekken 7 is basically you make one mistake and you die, so it's like, I'm just going to run away. This meant that in the Tekken World Tour, Tekken's main competitive outlet, the way that everyone would see Tekken 7 is just this game where everyone would run away from each other until someone hits the other guy, and it would take forever. And all of Tekken 8's combat changes, which are extensive for the Tekken series, seem to be all about tackling these issues presented in Tekken 7 specifically. The new heat system in Tekken 8 is the first time that a meter has ever been in a Tekken game, which is absolutely monumental in itself, but considering what the meter allows you to do, like activating it raw gives you super armor on activation as well as a move out of it. There are certain moves called heat engages that go into it and allow you plus frames, and going into heat allows you chip damage on block, a powerful move called a heat smash that deals a ton of damage and heavy plus frames on block, and you also gain additional other strong properties, usually on offense, that are character dependent. With this alone, it kind of paints the entire picture of Tekken 8 as being a more aggressive game. They even say it in the game itself. But that's not the only thing that they added to increase offense. Backdashing has been nerfed to de-incentivize running away, but sidestepping has been significantly buffed. allowing for evasive plays at closer ranges against your opponent's offense and defense, which is probably much cooler to watch because people are just like bobbing and weaving out of the way of stuff. You also have grey health that recovers upon connecting with the opponent either on hit or on block, and the same amount of health is recovered for both. There's an increased prevalence of mid/low 50/50s and plus frames, encouraging offense by making it easier to perform for both new and old players. And they decrease the prevalence of safe counter-hit launchers, also encouraging offense by making it less risky for getting the offense wrong. Rage Art has been made slightly safer on block to decrease the risk of a raw activation being blocked, although it's still launch punishable, but no longer Rage Art punishable and not launch punishable by certain characters. So from this, it's not just the heat system. The overall mechanical changes are built to heavily incentivize aggressive play compared to Tekken 7, and to me, it's hard to tell if the amount of aggressive changes that have been made are so much where it's difficult to tell if it will result in Tekken 8 having the opposite problem to Tekken 7 eventually, where the game is now overly aggressive rather than overly defensive. Some of you may be wondering why that's a bad thing. Aggression is fun to watch after all, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. Something like defense being strong in a game is boring to watch because that thing is the most prevalent thing. It's obvious that when you see something enough times, you get more bored of it as it goes on. So I don't necessarily think that defensive play is what's boring itself, it's the prevalence of it. And I think it's more than possible that a game that's overly aggressive, where the main strategy is just run up to someone and mash all of your best buttons until you win, would also get pretty old. In this sense, the best games that have stood the test of time over the course of many years are the ones that are more balanced in terms of offense and defense, where you can play both and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. And the fact that the Tekken devs have had years and years with this mentality in their head of making the game more aggressive to the point where they put it in the game, maybe it means that Tekken 8 is doomed to this same fate that I'm talking about here. But of course it's too difficult to tell talking about things like meta games 2 weeks after the game came out. Offense when a new game comes out is usually the best thing because people don't know how to defend against it yet. So it's hard to tell for now, but I don't know, maybe it will be that way in the future. But there are also other changes in the game that don't necessarily fall in line of the aggressive mindset. Like, for example, the strengthening of characters' overall toolkits to make them more varied in playstyle and less exploitable by a player skilled in the matchup, therefore making matches less predictable and one-sided. You're probably going to see a wider variety of moves and playstyles and strategies per character in Tekken 8 than you would in Tekken 7. And also things like having throws more useful by making their escape windows shorter whenever you get a counter hit, and also if you're Victor. Although that might be a bug we don't know yet. But if you're someone who does not care about competitive balance or the competitive integrity of the game, is the game fun? Well, fun games are about pushing buttons at lower levels, and this game encourages you to press buttons quite openly. So, yes, Tekken 8 is very, very, very fun. You get to mash buttons, you get a whole mode that allows you to mash buttons, you have really big moves that do really big things, and they're very easy to access, especially if you have the special style on, which is basically this game's version of modern controls. And I guess that's what this game is all about. It's all about having fun. At the end of the day, Tekken 8 is still just Tekken, and it's probably one of the best Tekken games ever made just based on raw content. So if that sounds cool to you, Tekken 8 I'd recommend. And hey, with all the accessibility options that are now in the game, maybe you could also win the Tekken World Tour, just like me. Arslan Ash is so going down. Thanks to my patrons on Patreon for making these videos possible, including my anonymous patron. And if you would like to become a patron, you can do so with the link in the top of the description below. All support is greatly appreciated.